What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I don't have a review for you today, but I have something a little different, and I feel like I've done something kind of like this on my channel before. I'm not entirely sure, but basically I wanted to talk about what I think would be a really cool idea to see in a comic book, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there for the masses to see because I highly doubt that I'm ever going to be writing for Marvel Comics, which is the company that I'm going to be talking about a little bit in today's video. Specifically, I don't feel like I'm ever going to be writing the Fantastic Four. I like the Fantastic Four quite a bit. They're not my favorite characters, but in recent years I've come to like them a lot more than what I used to. You can see over there, right there, there's a whole bunch of Fantastic Four on my shelf. And recently, last week, I did a review of Fantastic Four Visionaries Volume 5 by John Byrne. He did like 11 or 8 volumes on his run, and I think 8. And in Volume 5, you get to see for the first time Reed Richards' father, Nathaniel Richards. He has more or less settled on this alternate world where he has, this is spoilers for stuff that happens in that storyline from the early 1980s or the mid 1980s. So if you haven't read the John Byrne Fantastic Four Visionaries Volume 5, I am going to be spoiling the crap out of that book. So anyway, we find out that Nathaniel Richards, well, at first it's hinted that he is the warlord of this dimension, and he is a very evil dictator who's kind of taken over and is imposing his will on the people. Turns out he has married this lady who was kind of the leader of her own little tribe of Amazonian-type warrior women, and she has more or less become this dictator, and she's kind of painted him as the face of her own dictatorship. But he doesn't really know what's going on. He's more or less just sequestered in his own little castle, and he has a son. And that's really the focus of what I wanted today's video to be about. Nathaniel Richards had a son with this lady in this alternate reality. And then, again, spoiling stuff from the storyline, but that lady ends up dying, and then Nathaniel finds out what's going on, and he's like, well, guys, it's great to meet my son who I haven't seen in like over 10 years. It's great to see that he got married and that he has buddies, but I can't come back to Earth with you guys. I have to stay here. I have a son, and I have to try and make right what my wife, my now dead wife, has done on this world. I have to try and fix things. And as far as I know, we never do see Nathaniel Richards' other son again. We do end up seeing Nathaniel Richards later on. He showed up quite a bit in the 1990s and then at least once in the 2000s. I'm not sure if he showed up any more past that, but it seems like he was almost a fifth member of the Fantastic Four in the 90s. That's how often he was showing up. Like when the Fantastic Four were presumed dead after the whole Onslaught incident, he was not really Franklin's guardian, but he was the one who brought Franklin Richards to Generation X, where he could be mentored and trained by Sean Cassidy and Emma Frost. He's the one who brought Franklin there, and then he was kind of hanging out with the Fantastic Four during the whole Onslaught incident. And the thing that has always struck me about Nathaniel Richards, before I ever did read his debut in John Byrne's run, he always kind of struck me as a very cold, logical, emotionless kind of character. Basically, as I said in my review of the Fantastic Four Visionaries Volume 5, if Reed Richards didn't have any of his humanity. Reed Richards is always seen as being kind of all brains, no heart. But that's not true. If you actually go and read a Fantastic Four comic, he's got a lot of heart. He cares a great deal for his son, for his wife, for his buddies, Johnny and Ben. He cares a lot for all of them, but he's always kind of babbling about his smart stuff, his intelligent stuff, so sometimes that can get in the way, and people will misinterpret that as he doesn't care about his family or his friends, he just cares about his experiments. And Nathaniel Richards, before reading his debut in John Byrne's run, always struck me as that. What people actually think of Reed Richards, he actually is. And in his debut, he is not that. When we finally get a chance to meet him and he gets a chance to get reacquainted with his son and the rest of the Fantastic Four, he's kind of like, you know, I'm glad to see you guys. And he's a very friendly fellow. But then the next time we see him in the 90s, he strikes me as being very cold, emotionless, and very logical, just basically not the same kind of character. And also, we don't get to see his other son, Reed's half-brother. Whatever happened to this kid? And that brings me to the title of the video. Today I want to talk about what I think would be a really cool idea if we could see the return of Reed's half-brother. Now, the Marvel Universe exists in what I believe John Byrne was the guy who coined this term, a sliding timeline, if you will. It basically, everything from the events of Fantastic Four issue 1 all the way up to today happened over the span of about 13-ish years. There's no concrete way of determining it because many different writers handle it in different ways, but more or less 13 to 15 years, something like that. And this stuff happened in 1985, where Kitty Pryde was 13 years old, I think, 13 or 14. And now, in the current day Marvel Universe, she's like 21 or 22. So this kid would be about 7 or 8 years old if you brought him back in the Marvel Universe now. I would basically be stealing Scott Snyder's storyline that he did with Jim Gordon Jr. In his Batman run, which is a story I have not read, but I am somewhat familiar with the story, where basically Jim Gordon's son, Jim Jr., who was introduced in Batman Year 1, and then writers were basically saying, oh, hey, wait a minute, this kid doesn't actually show up in the modern day Batman comics, so what happened to him? So I believe Archie Goodwin kind of takes the kid and kind of gets rid of him in Night Cries, where he goes to live with his mom, and then we never see him again until Scott Snyder's run, where we find out that the kid is actually a psychopath, and he is a villain in his own right. Kind of, from what I've seen of different panels online and stuff, kind of as scary as the Joker. And so this kid comes back, and he becomes a thorn in the side for his father and also for Batman. So I would basically just straight up steal that story idea, but apply it to the Fantastic Four instead of Batman. So I would say that shortly after the Fantastic Four left this alternate reality where Nathaniel Richards was going to try and fix everything, his kid was somehow kidnapped from him, probably taken by somebody who was very close to him, like an advisor or somebody like that for the court, who thought maybe this kid, who is effectively the prince of our world now, he might fetch a really high price for somebody. Maybe his mother's people, these Amazonian warrior people, they were all still at large, as far as I can remember. I think they were. And maybe they would be interested in having their former leader, now dead, maybe they would be interested in having her son. Maybe they could use this boy, or maybe they could try and mold him and turn him into a weapon against his father. So somebody kidnaps the boy and sells him into slavery. And Nathaniel Richards is smart, very smart, but he would become a little bit desperate. He would become a little bit depressed. And eventually he would realize, okay, my son is gone. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to find him. And as far as he knows, his son is dead. Maybe even the person who kidnaps the boy might even plant some evidence that would suggest that the boy is dead. And this would echo back to biblical stuff, a little bit of religious parallels, if you will, with Joseph, who wore the coat of many colors, and his brothers, they sold him into slavery, and then they came back and told their dad, hey, Joseph, your favorite son is dead. You could do something like that, where Nathaniel Richards, for some reason, maybe because he thinks his son is dead, he no longer is searching for his son. And so when we see him again in the Marvel Universe in the 1990s, he's suddenly very cold. He's emotionally cut off. Why would he be emotionally cut off? Maybe because his son is dead, or he thinks that his son is dead. Meanwhile, while Nathaniel is doing all of that in the Marvel Universe, and we're seeing him throughout the 1990s and the early 2000s, meanwhile, Nathaniel's son, who was never named, we'll just call him Nathaniel 2.0, he is going through heck on earth. He is not having a good time. He's been sold into slavery. Maybe he was sold to those Amazonian warrior women. Maybe he was sold to somebody else. It doesn't matter, but he is going through a lot of stuff. And now, I want you to imagine, kind of, if you will, either Bane from The Dark Knight Rises, or even Bane from the comics, or even like taking it to another Tom Hardy role from the 1990s, Star Trek Nemesis, or it might have been early 2000s. It was early 2000s. Star Trek Nemesis, Shinzone, basically a kid who is just thrust into this really awful scenario and grows up to be kind of a terrible human being because of the situation that he was raised in. Maybe this kid would find somebody who would kind of take pity on him and try and guide him back onto a more morally just path, but this kid would see all this crap going on around him, like, okay, there's people getting murdered, there's people getting enslaved and raped, and he's probably like a worker in some huge camp somewhere on some alternate reality. Maybe he was sold to another reality. This is a place that can be easily accessed from the 616 universe. Maybe he was sold to a dimensional slaver, like that giant blue guy from Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men, Tullamore Vogue, whatever his name is. Maybe Nathan 2.0 or Nathaniel 2.0 was sold to some other reality where things are even worse than they were on his home world, and there's absolutely no way that he can get back home. But he has this guy who's kind of his one shining light of goodness in his life. He is the one person, kind of like Alfred for Batman, who in the early days after Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered, Alfred is kind of trying to guide Bruce away from this crazy idea of dressing up like a bat and going out and beating the snot out of criminals. He's trying to keep him from doing that, and eventually it's like, there's no point, he's going to do it, I might as well just try and keep him safe and keep him alive. This guy is kind of like that for Nathaniel 2.0. And then something happens, and this kid loses his mentor figure. Either the guy dies of old age, or he's murdered by some other people in his worker camp, and then the kid just just loses it. And now here's what would make this kid so dangerous. Nathaniel 2.0 is as smart, or potentially as smart, as Reed Richards would have been at that age. He is a super genius. The problem is he did not grow up in a world where technology was easily available to him. Keep in mind, the Marvel Universe exists in a sliding timeline. So Reed Richards was probably a teenager in the mid-1990s or early 1990s. So he would have been around right when the internet was starting to pick up speed. And so he would have had this huge world that a lot of us can't even comprehend at his fingertips, where he can do just about anything he wants because he is so smart. But this kid is a different kind of smart because he doesn't have all of this technological stuff at his disposal. So he has to kind of become more, instead of technologically brilliant, an inventor, if you will, like Reed Richards, he has to become more a tactical genius, a strategist who becomes sort of a shaper of men. Like all these people in this work camp, his allies, the ones who didn't murder his old friend, they kind of look to him as being this messianic figure, kind of like Paul from Dune, where you've got all these grown men looking at this teenager as this savior and their leader, kind of like that, only he's more of a villain. You've got this kid, Nathaniel 2.0, and he becomes this leader of all these people, and he leads a revolution, he kills all of his masters, and then somehow he finds out that there is somebody who might be able to help him. This guy named Reed Richards on the 616 universe. All this kid really wants to do is find a way to bring back his buddy who died. And so he wants to go to the 616 universe, and he meets Reed Richards, and bear in mind, Reed Richards has no idea who this kid is at first, and he says, hey, listen, you're really smart, I'm really smart, maybe we can work together here and try and find some way that I can go back in time and I can save my buddy who was murdered. And Reed's like, I don't think that's a good idea. Messing with the time stream, really bad. Bad things happen to wizards who mess in time, Harry. And this kid, he already has kind of lost it because his only good thing in his life is now gone and taken from him. And suddenly, you've got this guy who thinks that he's smarter than this kid. And he's like trying to tell this kid what to do. He says, no, you don't need to be building a time machine. I'm not going to help you with this. And this kid, he stays in the 616 universe. And this is where I said I would basically be stealing the whole Jim Gordon Jr., Scott Snyder idea. He becomes an ongoing threat for the Fantastic Four, mainly for Reed Richards. Imagine, if you will, if Doctor Doom, instead of being Reed's peer, who always felt like Reed looked down on him, imagine if Doctor Doom was younger and viewed Reed as more of an authority figure who's just trying to crush the youthful exuberance that he is, and then he's like, you know what, you're not as smart as you think you are. I am going to bring you down. And that's what this kid thinks. This kid, like I said, not as technologically smart as Reed. He would have been if he had grown up in a more technologically flourishing environment, but he grew up in a work camp on some alternate reality where he was probably scourged weekly. This kid does not have the mental capacity to build a time machine, and so basically he is going to become a thorn in the flesh to the Fantastic Four. He says, I am going to continue to be your enemy. I am going to take everything you love, Reed Richards, until you help me. And little does this kid even know that if he just went to Latveria and just found a way to break into that big castle over there, he could find a time platform right there, and then all he would have to do is go back in time and then find a way to go back to his world where his buddy was killed. But he doesn't know that because that's not really common knowledge in the Marvel Universe. There's probably like 15 people in the Marvel Universe who even know about Doctor Doom's time machine. But this kid would basically become an additional villain for the Fantastic Four. And I think it would be a very interesting story because it would explain this change in behavior that happened with Nathaniel Richards, which in my opinion is something that does need to be explored a little bit more. And it would also provide kind of an additional family link for the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four has always been about family, but it's always been the positive side of family. You've got a very loving relationship between Sue and Johnny, between Sue and Reed, between Reed and Ben. Ben has a great relationship with effectively his niece and nephew, although they are not actually his blood niece and nephew. Basically, you've got all these really great relationships between these characters. And sure, there's going to be an occasional rough spot where the Thing is angry at Reed because he is a rock monster and he's always going to be a rock monster. That's never ever going to change. Sure, occasionally you're going to have stuff like that, but more or less this family is all very loving toward each other. And now you're throwing a spanner into the works. Suddenly, Reed has a half-brother who's significantly younger than him. He's actually closer to the age of Franklin and Valerie than he is any of the adults on the team. And suddenly he's like, okay, I'm going to take away everything from you guys. I am going to become a living nightmare for you guys, and all I want you to do is help me go back in time so I can save my buddy. And eventually, he might even lose sight of that. He might just become so obsessed, so focused on getting revenge on Reed Richards. He might, over time, even forget forget about his friend, because it's been a little while since his friend was killed and taken from him, and it might just get to the point where all he cares about is taking away everything from the Fantastic Four, making Reed as alone as he feels himself. I think it's a pretty cool idea. It might be a little dark for the Fantastic Four, but the Fantastic Four have gone through some pretty dark stories, but I thought it was a kind of fun idea. It's something that occurred to me whenever I was editing that Fantastic Four review video that I did last week, so I thought I would share that with you guys. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments below. If you liked it, and if you want to see more videos like this, let me know. Tell me, hey, I love this video, and I might do other videos like this. I don't know. Sometimes I come up with ideas. I see myself as an aspiring writer. I love coming up with stories. That's usually about as far as it goes, coming up with the stories. I very rarely go so far as to execute the stories, but I see myself as an aspiring writer, so sometimes I'll come up with an idea and I don't want to share it with anyone, because someday in my hubris I see myself actually doing that story someday, so I don't want to tell people about it and kind of ruin my chances before I even start. But this is one of those things, like I said, where I just don't see myself ever working for Marvel Comics, and specifically the Fantastic Four, so I figured I would go ahead and give you guys this one as a freebie. So let me know what you thought about this video, and I will see you guys later in the week with some other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will catch you later.